dir noch angesäche, so bist du ihr aller Ehre. Was ist Wundes hier geschäche? Dass ein Magd ein Kind gebar, ihre über aller Engel Schar. Was das nicht ein Wunder gab.
This is The New Right, a podcast for the lost arts, reclaiming the literary Holy Land from the heathen. This is Dan Baltic, and unfortunately, Matt is not with us at the moment. He is recovering from undisclosed festivities and merriment, and hopefully he will join us halfway through the pod. But in any case, we are very happy and lucky to be here today with none other than Justin Murphy, who is the founder of Other Life, which is not only a community, an online community of scholars and independent researchers, but is also your personal scholarly brand and writing brand, the name of your podcast, the name of your monthly newsletter. So welcome, Justin. Good to have you.
What's up, Dan? Thanks for having me. It's not a monthly newsletter, more like weekly, sometimes even, 2 or 3 times a week occasionally. Sometimes it's more like once a week, or the past month I've taken off completely. I've been on a summer vacation the past month, but yeah, a little bit more than monthly or weekly.
Okay, great. Yeah. No, it's so, I mean, one of the reasons why this episode is special to me and why Matt really wishes he could be here, hopefully he'll pop in, is that your intellectual project has been central to, in some respects, my own and New Rights, because I met Matt on Indie Thinkers, which was the progenitor, if I'm right in saying that, of Other Life. Is that right, Justin?
Yeah, sure. It's kind of gone through many evolutions. I've had different names for things. I've tested out many different things. But that's right. Yeah, it used to be called Indie Thinkers because that was kind of the spirit of it. Independent writers, thinkers, creators, whatever, trying to kind of connect a bunch of people such as yourselves. And yeah, you guys meeting and then going on to build what you've built has been one of the many, success stories I'm very proud of that has kind of emerged from my orbit. So I'm really glad to hear that.
Absolutely. And I mean, so just to explain for the audience, in case they don't know, Indie Thinkers was and is in its evolving form under the Other Life, banner, a community of scholars, of people who have independent projects outside of the mainstream, outside of academia, but independent intellectual projects. And this is something that I think you have been at the forefront of identifying a unique need that is being underserved in the community, which is a kind of vehicle for connecting and working with other scholars, other thinkers, and growing yourself as a thinker outside of the mainstream academia and publishing and entertainment even ecosystem, because frankly that world is just too censorious, too stifling. I mean, we all know the story, and I mean that's what led me to Other Life, Indie Thinkers. Was I just, I had Nutcracker. I had written it. And we talked about this on your pod. Again, thank you for having me on Other Life, where we talked about how I had written it and I couldn't get an agent. I didn't really have, I mean, beyond kind of like not being able to advance my art professionally, I didn't have a community to share it with. And that just felt, terrible, frankly. Like, I mean, it's one thing to not have, professional advancement in terms of your art or whatever, but to not kind of have intellectual community, that's something that, like, I think a lot of people in our space want and need. And the kind of the value of it is so obvious to me, because immediately upon joining, I connected with Matt. We started talking about Nutcracker and publishing and the entertainment industry, and within a month we had made plans to start New Right. And that was a year and a half, to actually almost 2 years ago now. So yeah, that's a long introduction, but thank you, Justin.
Yeah, I love to hear it. Thanks for sharing that story with your audience. I think that independent writers are essentially some of the most powerful people in the world right now, in ways that people still just don't understand. Like, our culture is increasingly revolving around the insights of independent thinkers, right? If you look at like how someone like Tucker Carlson sources his content and talking points, he has people full-time like scouring Twitter, right? Looking for the interesting original takes. You go to any social gathering in any big city in America, there's going to be a bunch of people who have a lot of money, people who, millionaires are a dime a dozen, people who have found wealth for themselves. That's actually not that rare or not that hard in a way. Utmost respect for people who've been successful in that way. I'm not saying it's easy. I'm saying it's actually more rare to have truly original independent insight into anything whatsoever. And if you have that, it's actually one of the most in-demand things in the world. And people don't realize how insanely valuable, both economically, but also socially and culturally, just simply having a quiet, focused mind, some genuine erudition, and original, well thought out perspective. Possessing these things is more rare than possessing $1 million in a way. And if you have it, it immediately starts unlocking doors that you would not imagine. And this is one of the things that I see and that I take seriously, I think more than most people. And I've tried to build my life and a little business around it. Essentially, I'm trying to figure that out. So yeah, I think your story is a testimony to that. And many other people are finding this in their own way. So, touche to you guys. And what's up, Matt? How you doing?
Thank you, Justin. And yes, Matt has joined us. It's
Hey,
good to have you on, Matt.
Oh.
With perhaps some audio difficulties here.
I'm gonna try and call.
Okay, yeah, call it. All right, yeah, no. So I mean, that is a very good kind of summation of encapsulation of your mission there, Justin. And I think, I mean, so when I came across Indie Thinkers, when I came across Other Life, this was, I think, to some extent, and you correct me if I'm wrong, tell me to what extent this is true, your project and just generally online scholarship, online kind of communities have been accelerated by this period of forced quarantine that we all went through. And we see that has resulted in, like, so many, Zoom has become a kind of staple of being part of a corporate structure. And we also see the rise of online learning and online, communities. So yeah, what do you think about the extent to which the pandemic has influenced the rise of this thing?
So I think the pandemic was a specific accelerator of something, and it did move the needle in pushing forward a bunch of these trends you allude to. But really, the much more powerful causal variable here is just the absolute degradation of our cultural institutions. It's just,
Sure.
It's been going on for a very long time. The decline has been long standing. If you read someone like Harold Bloom in the 90s, or you listen to some interviews with Harold Bloom, it's someone I've been reading a lot lately and taking great inspiration from in recent weeks. He said this all, in the 90s. This is like almost 30 years ago now. It was pretty clear that our universities And the institutions in our society that are dedicated to the transmission of great knowledge, to, passing generations, passing on that torch to the next generation, that there has just been an absolute dereliction of this responsibility and of this privilege. Really, it's just not happening anymore. And it was terminal already in the 90s. And anyone who could see it and had the courage to simply point out what was happening. And Harold Bloom, the reason I admire him and been paying attention to his books lately is that he was merciless in saying this. He was absolutely not sentimental. He said it's already over. And this is someone who is a professor at Yale, who was within the institution saying plainly, it's over. And I don't see any way it's going to be safe. This was already in the 90s. And so it's now beyond late stage. It's like not even really questionable anymore. It's just over. And so that's what I think the big background variable that has to be essentially recognized. And most people just don't want to recognize that. Most people cling to some fantasy of like, oh, but if I could become a professor, then I could do it right. I could fix this, or we could fix this, or whatever. And I'm just like, I try to be utterly unsentimental about it. I think like the cultural institutions are over, completely over. And it's actually an amazing, wonderful thing. It's a great opportunity. It's fantastic. All it means is that creative and intellectual life is now returning where it belongs and where it has been most of its time in human history, which is, in the hearts and minds and souls of independent reading and writing, thinking people. That is the overwhelming majority of the history of Western intellectual life has been independent people who are just reading, writing, thinking, and publishing their own observations and discoveries. That has been the lion's share of the greatest work that's ever been published in Western civilization. It's only been a relatively small percentage of the time that we've had this university formation, this professorial formation. Has been a very, very small blip in the larger history of the great works of Western civilization. So all that's happening is this little blip is deflating. It's over finally. And now we're returning to the tried and true great tradition of the independent thinker and the independent intellectual. And we should be absolutely happy about it.
Yeah, 100%. To what extent do you think the premium on an Ivy League degree or something like that is being lost today? I think in the professional industries, law, medicine, what have you, that remains true. But I think culturally, beyond kind of the industries where there's, to some extent to varying degrees, measures of, barriers to entry, it's simply, when the kind of degradation to the admissions process and in fact, and even more so to the actual education you receive at a place like Harvard is, degraded, it becomes, not so much a mark of value. And a greater mark of value, frankly, is, like how many people are listening to you, how many people are, and that is, that is now obvious. It wasn't obvious before. You couldn't, like 10 or 20 years ago, be like, oh, well, how many retweets do you get? How much engagement do you get? But when you have people in like the legacy media or what have you, who are, tweeting or writing articles and no one's responding to it, it's a mark of, some sort of real moribund, aspect of, the cultural institutions. And, indeed, the kind of the project that you're undertaking to, create and mold independent thinkers, you're, conferring, I think you're guiding them to a path that will lead them to a greater, possibility of contribution and, and a greater, potential power, because people will be actually, because they're saying interesting stuff, listening to them, retweeting them.
Totally.
And
absolutely. And it's actually much larger than that. There's a reason why I don't even use the term thinker anymore, which just sounds pretentious. And it actually understates the point. It's actually not about some rarefied tradition of, the lone genius or the autodidactic, inventor who's like going to discover something fundamentally original or something like that. It's actually more general and more modest in a way. It's not about being a thinker or a philosopher so much as it is living one's life authentically and thoughtfully. If you look at someone like Montaigne, who I also have been taking a lot of inspiration from recently, Montaigne essentially invented the essay form. This is in the 16th century. He decided to withdraw from the workaday world just to read, to think, and to write, essentially. And in this absolutely humble, modest withdrawal from society, it's simply seeking to understand what he really believes and to figure out truly what seems true to him and what really seems valuable and correct to him in his own heart of hearts. Simply trying to figure that out as one humble human being among others was itself, he didn't know it at the time, but it was itself a kind of revolutionary step forward in the history of the intellectual life. But he wasn't trying to do that. He wasn't trying to be that. It was incredibly modest and simple desire to just understand what he believed and what he thought and to live an examined life. And so I think that this is really important. And so this is why, when I first left academia and kind of set out with this mission, I tested out many different ways of thinking about it and different ways of talking about it. I'm figuring this out as I go. That's why I originally had this program that I called Indie Thinkers. But the reason I'm kind of folding that concept or that whole brand under just this general kind of like other life brand as a kind of mysterious placeholder for all of this is that, I don't describe myself as a philosopher. I don't describe myself as a thinker. I think that's just ridiculous, and it doesn't hit right. It doesn't actually get the point across. I'm just a humble person trying to figure out what is true, and I'm trying to do that at all costs, to keep my mind honest, to keep my mind independent and healthy, and to be living and breathing in only the finest materials out there in the history of civilization. And it's like that I'm doing that because it's necessary to do that, to live a virtuous and complete full life. And so in a way, that's part of the revolution that I think is happening here. It's like we're letting go of this kind of rarefied, pretentious, egotistical, like self-obsessed, navel-gazing institutional tradition. And this is something much larger. But your original question I wanted to respond to, Dan, your original question was, do these universities still have, brand premium? And I think without a doubt, the elite university brands still do carry a premium, as you're right to note. Without a doubt, having a degree from Harvard is going to get you more opportunities than not having a degree or a degree from a worse university. But that's the opportunities that it will give you, and the premium that it will give you is it is constrained. It is contingent upon a certain part of the world. It only operates within this kind of gate-kept sector of the culture and the economy. So what I mean by that is you can kind of break society into two camps if you want to. I would argue this is very useful to do conceptually. If you think of half of the economy and the culture in America as the gate-kept wing, and then the outside, I sometimes call it just everything outside the institutions, or that which is not gate kept, which essentially boils down to entrepreneurship of one kind or another. So you're either playing within some kind of bureaucratic institutional game where there are specific individuals with titles whose job it is to say yes or no to who advances and who gets more money and who gets power. That's the gate kept world. I sometimes just call it the institutions. And then there's everything that's outside of that, which essentially boils down to the marketplace, just finding a way to make a little bit more money than you spend through whatever creative, ventures, whether that's software or content, or there's so many different ways to hack it nowadays. You can basically break up the entire culture and economy into these two buckets. And the brand premium that universities still have, which is real, only applies to the gate-kept part. And it's very real in that gate-kept part, without a doubt. But outside of that gate-kept part, it means almost nothing. And I would contend that all of the action, all of history's moving energy is going into the direction of the outside. If you think about it, right? Who's getting rich in interesting ways? Who's making an impact on millions of other people's minds? Where is all of the new, interesting, high power, high octane energy, economically, culturally, and socially? It's obviously more and more all on the outside of these gate-kept institutions. And so if you're a young person and you want to read great books, you want to read great books, you want to think what's true, you want to think at the highest level of your abilities, you want to come up with projects and build a path for yourself in your adult life, in the most impactful and significant, dynamic, free, and meaningful, relevant way suited to your moment in history. It's obvious to me, it's beyond obvious at this point that you need to go on the outside. You need to bet yourself on the outside. And that's the real, like, that's where the discrepancy is hard to argue with. So it's not a matter of the universities don't matter whatsoever anymore. They do matter within a particular circumscribed domain of institutional bureaucratic society. But does anyone want to play that game anymore if you had a choice? No, that's what's going down the tubes. And that's my model for it.
I think it's very interesting to dig into the value of networks here, because the value of networks in connection with, an Ivy League institution, what have you, is a very, as you know, a very traditional, networking within a specific industry, stuff of that nature. But if you're talking about the cultural industry, which is a silly word. Well, if you're talking about culture, if you're talking about contributions to real scholarship or art, I think that we would probably agree that the academic pedigree is becoming less and less important. And as you just said, a lot of the real work of art and scholarship is taking place outside of the system. That being said, networks are still important. Networks are still valuable. So as I was discussing earlier, I wrote Nutcracker in a vacuum, just sharing it with like an old college friend, and I didn't have anyone to share it with. I didn't have any idea, how am I going to get people to read this? The mainstream cultural industry is dead. How am I going to get this out there? And so there is a value in creating networks outside of the mainstream culture, because then you can plug into that. And yes, networking and networks are a kind of, in a way, it's not exactly a sexy phrase or a sexy way of thinking about things, but they are valuable. And, even outside, if you have something that's like a great work of art or a great contribution to the culture, but you don't know anyone, no one's going to read it, no one's going to find out about it. So I mean, what do you think about the emerging marketplace, the emerging need for a sort of network structure outside of academia, outside of the culture industry?
Yeah, I completely agree with you that some network structure is what replaces the kind of institutional network structure. I just think that it's quite organic, and it's much less, it's much less of a plannable thing than people often think. I think this is the common misconception. People get, I think, a little carried away sometimes when they start thinking about how they're going to mastermind the great counter network. There's a lot of this kind of thinking and discourse, and I think that often it almost is doomed to fail, because it just gets a lot wrong, and it makes some wrong assumptions. Often the most powerful networks are those that are based on the most organic, genuine, kind of enthusiastic networks of passion and genuine enthusiasm, right? So it's like, if your goal is to build some counter network that's going to replace the institutions, and this, a lot of people like to talk like this, that often falls flat because it doesn't actually have the defining characteristic of actually successful emergent networks, which is organic just enthusiasm and energy. No one gets organically energized around some like vision of building a systematic alternative network. Like that doesn't excite anyone. That's not an organic shared motivation. It's a very kind of Machiavellian, cold, analytical, rationalistic, like power dream. Like no one actually unites around that organically on a day-to-day basis. That's the error that I think a lot of people make. And so that's why, like, my whole philosophy around this and trying to build this type of network, I never talk about, it's never part of the explicit thing. I'm not like, selling anyone some like power dream, like, oh, we're going to build the counter network. I never talk like that. I never, that's not how I see it. It's rather the way I do see it is You know, I try to find people who have a true independent spirit where I look at their work and I'm like, oh, this person genuinely interests me. Like that's the only thing that matters. That's the only thing that counts is genuine signal that's genuinely intriguing and curious and motivating my further interest. Because if I can find that anywhere, like in, you know, hidden somewhere on the internet or whatever, I want to just connect those people. I want to connect with those people, and then I want those people to connect with each other. Because that's where like you get readers and writers who really genuinely don't care about their audience size. They don't care about money or fame or power. They literally just have a calling to produce a meaningful vision that they feel called to produce. And they're doing it for real and they're putting in the work. You connect those people with a few other people who are literally doing the same and they're not looking for anything else. That's the hardest thing to find. That's the hard that, you know, and if those people can actually share their work and find, oh, wow, I like this person's work. I'm actually learning something from following this other random person who I've never heard of, who doesn't have clout, who is not famous. He's not cool for some external reason. It's not fashionable. Just I see in this other random independent person's work, I see something true. I see something real. I see something inspiring, and it's genuine and organic. That's the power. That's the magic. That's the only legitimate social cultural thing that you can actually bootstrap a network around, because that's the real deal. And so I'm always laser focused on that. I'm just looking for people who are the real deal. And it doesn't necessarily mean they're the best or the greatest or even good at all, but there's something that it's the authenticity and that kind of real vocation, that real calling, and the basic ability to, you know, put in the work and to show up consistently, and to just, you know, be a part of it, be involved with others, you know, look at others' work and be, you know, kind of friendly and like interested, at least open and interested to other people trying to do the same. That's my whole philosophy of network building and the actual my model for like what it means to build a genuine, meaningful kind of cultural community.
Absolutely. It I mean, it reminds me of when I, you know, had just joined Other Life Indie Thinkers, and there was a fiction writing workshop that you had just started at that point about 2 years ago, very early days. But I remember, you know, being excited to kind of show up for it. And, you know, that type of energy of, you know, being with people who are excited about doing this stuff that you're doing, excited about the same thing, that is, you know, that's something that is hard to find today in this kind of deracinated society.
Yeah, well, we have this massive problem right now, which is that it is now possible to become kind of famous and make kind of a lot of money through publishing words on the internet. And there's now dozens and dozens of people who have done this very shamelessly, like people who are just not very interesting, not very thoughtful writers, but who are, you know, they've built a newsletter to 100,000 followers, and they have, you know, they're making great money with ads, and they have a podcast as well. And it's like, these people are kind of a very early form of, I mean, they are publishing words, and that is the thing that they're essentially selling. So because it is possible to get famous and rich from producing words on the internet, that's been actually a really difficult thing. That's been almost a bad thing in a way, because people look at that and they think like that's what it means to be a writer, or that's what it means to be a thinker. And I'm not even throwing shade on those people. That's fine. That's a fine hustle. It's just that's a very different tradition. That's a very different type of work. It's just not the same thing as people who are, you know, kind of called to participate in the great conversation of Western civilization at a higher level. And so in a way, the new era of independent writers becoming quite economically viable, in a way, it's more confusing than anything, and it actually has been counterproductive in many ways, because people start thinking, oh, I have to grow my audience super fast, or I have to type out tweets in these formulas that are viral. You know, it's like a lot of it is getting really, really overheated and really cringe and shameless. So in a way, I you know, that's as much a problem as anything. So I'm interested in private community, because I think it's the only way to actually sustain longer term or more original high value work. Because if your only sense of social reality as a writer is like the likes and the retweets you're getting on Twitter, Well, it's easy to see. There's nothing wrong with that. It's just easy to see that if that's all you have, if that's your center of gravity as a social creature, then you're going to go further and further down like the deep end of like really pretty chintzy, formulaic, relatively meaningless stuff. It can be fun and and people can do that well. I'm not saying, you can build a massive audience and also be a smart, cool, interesting person, but you need something else to get you to do the long form work, the reading, the patient reading and writing at a more ambitious level. To sustain that psychologically, you need to have some other people who have the same goals, who have the same values, who you're talking with and sharing work with on a regular basis. And that's the value add that a strong private community brings to the table that like social media can't bring right now, I think.
Absolutely.
Dan, would this be a good time to talk a little bit about Base de Luz?
Absolutely, Matt. Let's get into
it.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, you guys can hear me okay now, right?
Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, good. First of all, I'm sure Dan explained to you, Justin, I ended up going to Curtis Yarvin's birthday party last night, very last minute. So that is why I was late and why I may have to leave a little bit early and why I'm like a little bit of a mess coming into this. But I'm really, hopefully I'm not throwing too much of a wrench into your guys' conversation. I was mostly just listening, but I did want to participate, a little bit. And, a couple of things. First of all, it's because I was at this party, a lot of the stuff's resonating even more, hanging out with lots of Urbit people and, Substack writers. So a lot of it's really resonating. And I really like what you said earlier about how, you're kind of moving away from the thinker sort of label because that puts up a divide between like the thinker philosopher community and like the general public. I kind of dig that, you're trying to break that down a little bit because that's kind of one of the problems with like ivory tower academia in the first place, right? Is that it becomes too insular and it loses track of the sort of existential reasons why people think and do philosophy and engage in, alternative ways of thinking about things and practices in the first place. With regard to that and, the existential end of things, I just wanted to say, reading Base de Luz a few years ago, like right before we started this podcast, was a really huge influence on the way I think about a lot of this stuff. Specifically, I think it's chapter 5 about Nietzsche and Nietzsche's idea of the eternal recurrence of the same, and de Luz's reading on that as a way of grounding commitment. So I wondered if you wanted to unpack that section a little bit.
Yeah, sure. I can talk to that. So, I mean, a lot of Nietzsche scholars would not really like my interpretation here. It is somewhat self-consciously, it's sort of tendentious. It's sort of a provocative, personal misreading, if you will. I take my liberties here, but I do think that it is a defensible way to read Nietzsche somewhat provocatively. And the story would go something like this. So a lot of people read the typical scholarly way to read Nietzsche around, what he says when it comes to the eternal recurrence is one of his famous ideas. I'll give you kind of the super simple, like cartoonish recap. I mean, he basically says that one should imagine one's life, everything that one has gone through in one's life. One should imagine it playing over and over again, that everything you've been through will continue to happen forever, and that one should be content with this. Essentially, it's people read it in different ways. There are different schools of thought about what exactly he's trying to say or do with that. I subscribe to, as far as like known scholarly ways of interpreting it, the school of thought I subscribe to would be that, I see it as a kind of ethical device, a kind of ethical a thought experiment, a way of checking in on oneself regularly to check that one has a healthy and strong attitude, and that one is refusing a spirit of resentment, and that one in fact has a correctly attuned relationship to the world. If you can at all times affirm everything as potentially repeating into the future ad infinitum. If you can affirm that in sincerity, then you are a strong, healthy soul. Is how I kind of read that, and other people have read that in a similar way. What I talk about in the book that is a little bit more idiosyncratic, that some Nietzsche scholars would take issue with, is that a lot of people read Nietzsche as this kind of proponent of a sort of naive liberal freedom. Is kind of like,
Definitely.
you know,
Yeah.
the Nietzschean Übermensch is allowed to do whatever he wants. He can kind of live whimsically, you know, if he wants to, you know, have one girlfriend today, he can have one girlfriend today. And
Yeah.
then a few months later, if he wants to take another girlfriend, that is the prerogative of the Nietzschean Übermensch, who is not constrained
Yeah.
by religion and traditional strictures, right? That this is one kind of naive liberal, you know, kind of perception of Nietzsche's kind of ethical spirit. And I read Nietzsche very differently, you know, through Deleuze. I think that Nietzsche is actually you know, this idea of the eternal recurrence and what I talk about in the book as the dice throw. There's some interesting lines in Nietzsche about the throwing of the dice. Like the throwing of the dice, people often interpret in this way, like, you know, you should let randomness rule, and you can always throw the dice again. And if that says you should go a different direction, just go a different direction. You know, you're not constrained to the past. Live freely in this kind of like liberal Übermensch vision, right? But I say no. The dice throw, this concept of the dice throw, this concept of the eternal return in Nietzsche, these are actually the real spirit of that is that one is always constrained by the last throw of the dice, and the challenge is to live moving forward with a fidelity to the last roll of the dice. So the emphasis is not on, you know, the whimsical liberal, you know, creativity of the Übermensch, you know, throwing the dice as many times as he wants. No, it's rather the emphasis is on having the strength to be faithful to whatever the last roll of the dice was. And people don't like this because this is seen as a kind of, well, it's a very different feeling, right? That's a much more conservative feeling. That's about loyalty and faithfulness and kind of obedience to the past in a way. And a lot of people don't like that because they see that as like the opposite of what Nietzsche was trying to say. But I actually think, you know, there's a way to read Nietzsche consistently and a way to read Deleuze consistently where they actually are. This is actually what they think and what they want, and it's at least one way to read them, and that's what I took from Nietzsche and from Deleuze in that point.
No, I liked it a lot. Again, I'd been reading Nietzsche for years before reading your book, but I'd never come across something that was in quite that, I guess you could call it conservative vein, but nevertheless, that sort of gives grounding to wanting to live a life that really builds up, that is not that, you know, kind of gross liberal interpretation of Nietzsche as like, you know, do whatever you want, man. The way I read it is kind of like a call to throw yourself into things. You know, if you have something that is in your life, whether it's a birth circumstance or a relationship, the call, you know, it's not a guarantee that that nothing will change, that you're only going to be with one person forever or anything. But it's kind of a call to radical existential creativity, to throw yourself in as much as you can, you know, and then if it doesn't work for some reason, well, at least you tried. And I think there still is that Nietzschean boldness and fieriness to that, without it being some dumb, like, you know, rock and roll heroin, you know, type of thing, where it's like, you know, do whatever you want. No, I mostly just want to comment. Like, I guess it's not. I'm sure there's other people who've said similar things about Nietzsche. Obviously, the whole like notion of existentialism often does have to do with a lot with responsibility and taking responsibility for your life to the fullest extent. But a lot of people, you know, misread Nietzsche, as you said. So it was definitely one of the best distillations of that I'd ever come across. And I think you also say this in the book. It's especially useful, you know, following, you know, the death of God, as Nietzsche would call it, or you know, just postmodernism, the postmodern condition, this condition we're all in, where we're, you know, whether it's because we're like mixed race or from, you know, different religious traditions, like we're not always grounded in that tradition that's going to tell us what to do. So in order to get the benefit of being grounded, you have to engage in this kind of existential creativity. Because it's postmodernism, because there's so many different voices telling you what to value, you have to, as Nietzsche would tell us, you have to decide upon those values for yourself. And how do we do that? Through this eternal recurrence of the same, this affirmation of both chance and necessity. I think it's a really great distillation.
Yeah, that's well put. I think it's a very important point. It's a very fine point. It's lost on most people, but this is the difference between having a successful, virtuous, powerful life and having like literally a failed, sad, resentful life. I mean, it really does come down to that. It's like you need to get these questions right for yourself. It's a matter of life or death, really, to get these types of questions right for yourself. And a naive misreading of someone like Nietzsche, if you take that really seriously, you will screw up your whole life, you know?
Yeah. No, absolutely. And again, I think this is also testament to what you were talking about earlier, engaging with these thinkers, not because it's like, oh, I'm so smart, I'm doing philosophy, but rather because, as you said, these are grave existential matters of life and death. It is stuff that not just academics should be engaging with. It's a profound way to think about your life, especially given postmodern conditions, shall we say. And the other part of Base Deleuze that I wanted to highlight was chapter 9, Deleuze-Petersonianism, where you talk about Jordan Peterson and Deleuze. But I don't even want to talk about Peterson so much as this notion of kind of memeing your own audience into existence. And I think you and Dan may have been talking a little bit about this before I got on. But also very profound effect on me, especially with regard to like online activity and such. But I feel like it's related to that Nietzsche idea of affirming necessity as well. It's like it's a way of being true to yourself, to really say what you want to say and I'll just, as you put it, if there exists a true claim for which no audience yet exists, develop the claim until you produce its audience. I mean, I think that's such a great sort of rallying cry for those of us who are engaged in this kind of thing, podcasting, writing online, etc.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you appreciated that. That's very nice to hear. And yeah, I mean, I think that basically, like all of the great artists, thinkers, writers, whatever you want to call them, have started with the vision that they have in their own mind. They feel that they need to bring it into being. And typically at the beginning, there is not a known audience for it. There's not like some constituency that is immediately eating it up. It's incredibly rare that that's ever the case with great works, whether it's in philosophy or art or science. And so it's really important for how we think about culture and how we think about our own cultural projects. As you said, for especially independent writers and creators, or whatever you want to call these types of people that we are. If your goal is to build an audience, you can, hit Twitter and play some certain playbooks and write some certain formulaic tweets a few times a day. And like, you can grow an audience relatively quickly following certain formulas. But there are now many thousands of people doing that. There's now many thousands of people with more than 100,000 Twitter followers who are kind of like shilling like philosophy, inspirational philosophy or culture type lessons and stuff like that. So like, you can do that if you want to. But are you going to actualize an original artistic or intellectual vision? Almost certainly not, right? It's just a different thing. It's a totally different thing. I'm not even throwing shade on those people. And so the question then becomes, if you really do have a calling to actualize a unique, more elevated vision that participates in the great conversation of Western civilization, if that is who you are, and you don't have to be, very few people are. It's a relatively small minority a very small minority of the population, really. But if you are in that category, you need different ways of thinking. You need the correct ways of thinking. You need to know how to think about that, or you're never going to even be able to take a shot at it, really. And this is, I think, one of the most important high leverage mental models or frameworks for this type of person, which is lost on most people, which is what you just said, essentially, that you have to see yourself as producing the audience that you want, rather than creating content for some existing audience. And it's a very different thing. It's much harder. It takes longer. It takes much more time. It takes much more kind of resolve and sophistication and patience. But that is the task before you if you want to participate in the great conversation. And I'm not saying I've successfully risen to this challenge or anything like that. I would never claim that, but I do, I do, that is how I see my goals, and I think that's how we should all have the courage to, see our goals in that way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And just for people who haven't read the book, to unpack this a bit, the examples you give in the book are Jordan Peterson, who sort of had a unique take on psychology and sort of developed that for years before hitting it off with a big audience. But then also another archetypal example that you cite would be Franz Kafka, not being properly German, or I don't remember, I don't have the quote in front of me, but I think Deleuze wrote about Kafka.
That's right.
He essentially produced his own audience. He wasn't really fully Jewish, wasn't really fully German, and his genre. He essentially, I'm probably incorrect about this, but he basically invented a genre of surrealism, right, that we now all know and love. But he essentially created his own audience.
The Kafka bit is from Deleuze. I'm no Kafka specialist myself, but I mentioned Kafka as cited or as quoted by Deleuze as an example of this. But I think it's easy to find other examples. Yeah, I think Jordan Peterson is an interesting example because he's contemporary. It's very easy to hate on Jordan Peterson. It's very tempting. Now that he's so massive, he's really stratospheric. It's easy to kind of say, oh yeah, he's writing this kind of schlocky self-help stuff. He's lame. Like this is kind of like a popular way to think about Jordan Peterson if you're, from a more sophisticated audience. But I think that's actually quite wrong. I think Jordan Peterson is actually still underrated as an intellectual in a way.
Yeah,
I think what he's done, his life, his career, I think is just so stupendous and so interesting and really remarkable kind of paradigmatic case study of the changing tides of public intellectual life today. Just because, and the thing I talk about in the book that you're alluding to is that he was publishing his lectures on YouTube for many years, way before anyone cared, way before there was any kind of template really for an academic professor to have this kind of stratospheric rise. And so he was clearly doing it out of his own calling. He wasn't, his calling to post his content on YouTube consistently was not it was not some kind of like play for international stardom. He never could have imagined it, right? He never would have done it for that reason, because statistically it would have been so unthinkable. But rather he just believed enough in his own, independent, reflections, his observations on social science and psychology that deviated from the institutional playbook, that his ideas and his perspective, which was not rewarded by the tracks of the professorial career that he was embedded in. He nonetheless believed in his own unique observations enough to cultivate them and to put them online just because he felt called to put them online. And he produced an audience that was not already there. And that's one of the true marks of the really great thinkers, I believe. And I think he will be remembered more favorably, even in the long term, in the long term of the canon. I think he's much more sophisticated and impressive than people are inclined to give him credit for right now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
To what extent do you think, in one of your recent podcast episodes of Other Life, you discuss, as we've just discussed previously, the notion that you, if you're writing for an audience, not necessarily just writing for any audience, but if you're writing in a sort of more pandering way on Twitter, what have you, to kind of satiate the needs of a specific audience, you are probably not going to produce work that is as good as if you're writing for yourself. And I mean, I think to a certain extent, based Deleuze, I mean, this was, something that there, as we're talking about, there was not an audience for it. You created an audience for it. And many of us are kind of creating our own audiences for our respective, works of art, our respective, writing projects. But there is a certain paradox, at least I find, in that if you are, writing, yes, you do not want to be pandering to the needs of the crowd, the wants of the crowd. But you do, I mean, at least for me, maybe some people truly write for themselves, but you do have to have someone in mind, or some type of, you know, friend. Or so I in like a recent, and you know, this is, you know, perhaps a revealing example, but in a recent tweet, I said something to the effect of, I don't write for my readership, I don't write for myself, I write for my most honest, most insane friend. And what do you think about that? The idea that you have to, as a writer, have a certain kind of North Star to whom you are addressing your ideas.
I think this is a great question. It's a really important question. And I've written before recently, as you alluded to, that you should generally write for yourself and yourself alone. There's a good case to be made that a lot of the, perhaps most of the truly great writers in the past had essentially this kind of mentality. But you're right. You point to an important paradox. It's confusing because if you actually write in your notepad or wherever you write, and you're literally just writing what feels fun to you in that moment or something like that, that is not really the right way of understanding it. That's as loaded with possible false paths as anything, right? You can go off into this kind of like absurd navel gazing kind of like masturbatory kind of failure mode, right? And so you point out correctly that on some level, you know, you have to have some seriousness about producing work that is interesting or enjoyable to other people on some. It has to connect with other people on some level, obviously, right? And so there is a seeming kind of question around that. And I think your solution to it is a beautiful, you know, solution to this paradox. But I would say a different one, which I've thought a lot about, which is simply this: that when I say write for yourself and yourself alone, I'm not saying write to get your jollies off as you're doing the writing for your own like self-amusement. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is write for yourself and yourself alone, but as if you were the reader. So you're writing for yourself as the reader, and that's totally different than writing for yourself as the writer. And so what I mean by that is you want to produce products that are enjoyable, that are readable, that are fun, that have these different types of properties that are in fact, you know, the things that make work resonate with other people. The point is just you should be the person that is the target market, essentially. So you are writing for a market, and you are paying attention to things like, is this enjoyable? Is this readable? Is this going to resonate in a way that's edifying or satisfying or funny or exciting or whatever? These tones, these notes you want to hit that make work resonate with human beings. You still want to do that. You are writing for a target market, but the target market should be you as a reader. And that's the key distinction.
Absolutely. And perhaps to an extent, your close intellectual peers. So for instance, if you belong to Other Life or some other community, you may, you know, have a friend, someone who you have in mind when you're writing something. But that's a very different thing than having in mind the kind of like, you know, your followers on Twitter, the general, like, you know, reading marketplace or something more business minded.
I like your twist when you say you're writing for your most insane and honest friend. Or you could also say your most insane and honest version of yourself. It would be the same thing, essentially, right? And I like that because, you know, when I say write for yourself and yourself alone, but we understand that correctly as, you know, yourself as a reader, like what do you want to read as a reader? Write that. You might just add to that the qualification that in your highest self, your highest version of yourself, you know, not your lowest version of yourself or even your average day-to-day version of yourself, but, you know, write for yourself as a reader in your highest form possible, whether that's like your most honest or your most courageous or most insane, as you say. You know, bring something into the world that your honest self would say, this is amazing.
Absolutely. Do we want to get into, to an extent, I mean, as someone who's, you know, very online, we all are, you know, I tweet a lot. I do wonder, to what extent. I mean, I know that I am writing on Twitter, writing for an audience, writing for my, followers, but I wonder to what extent the, needs of, I mean, even to kind of drill down specifically on Twitter, this kind of like short attention span medium, I find myself almost like thinking in aphorisms after like a year and a half on Twitter. And I think, not to kind of toot my own horn, but I think I've gotten pretty, and we discussed this on our pod, I've gotten, pretty good at Twitter. I've gotten pretty good at kind of like thinking and writing this way. But I do wonder about its effect on my overall intelligence and like creative capacity. And I feel the internet, and not just Twitter, but all social media, is training us to be in this kind of, intensely responsive manner to not just, criticism or anything, but just like in general, where we're trying to, we're always broadcasting, we're always performing.
So I've thought about this a lot, and the Other Life course that we run multiple times throughout the year now, which is, I alluded to it before, it's basically just like, a crash course in reading and writing for the 21st century, citizen of the internet. The way that I have solved this problem, because you're absolutely right, it's a problem, is the following. So first of all, it's important to realize it something like Twitter and social media is, for writers, an incredible gift on one level.
Sure,
you have to you have to kind of be awe-inspired by the gift that, anyone can write a 280 character message, and Twitter will go and show it to other people who have never heard of you before for you. And if it's interesting and if it resonates with people, it can, be seen by many thousands or even millions of people with some amount of regularity, actually, for free. This is just at your fingertips as a writer. If you're a writer and you're interested in developing ideas and sharing your ideas with the world, if this doesn't just excite you, then you're probably resentful or something, or you're confused or whatever. Like, the first step is like, you do have to be awe-inspired by this and appreciate how amazing and lucky we are. Like, it's the most amazing time ever to be a writer, because you can write short, simple things and it will get shown to lots of people quickly and free, in a way that's free for you, right? So that's the first thing, is to appreciate that and take that seriously. But the second thing is, you're right. If you do that too much and you fall in love with that, exactly that thing precisely, you will quickly, your mind will be destroyed. I mean, you can find many people who have fallen prey to this. Like, their ability to think and say and produce anything other than like 280 character quips is destroyed. So that's a real failure mode, which you also have to look at that with awe as well, and take that very seriously, because it can happen, as you're alluding to. But there's a simple solution to this, which we've kind of converged on through much experimentation in the course that we do, which is this. You read and you write in your notebook, however you'd like to do it, whether it's by paper or in your writing app or whatever. You do all of that privately and separately from posting. It's a separate, these are two different activities, essentially. The reading and the thinking and the writing is one sacred, original, creative, private activity that you're doing some amount of time every single day, ideally, at least an hour a day for most people, I recommend. That's completely separate. That's original. That's unconditioned. That's you finding your own voice, making progress on your own kind of research agenda. Then just you're periodically, also probably once a day or a few times a week, you're just taking some of that and you're sharing it with the world in these short quips, because it is just an amazingly powerful and valuable opportunity that we have to just share little bits of our perspective out with the world at scale. So the key thing is to see these as two different activities, essentially. And as long as you can keep that kind of, you see these as two, the thinking, the reading, the thinking, and the writing is one activity with its own dignity and its own kind of attitude and frame of mind. And then going onto Twitter and posting and sharing with the world, that's a separate activity. That's the key thing that will prevent you from getting your brain kind of Twitter poisoned, because you're not allowing any semblance of the absurdly mistaken notion that when you log on to Twitter and you're shooting from the hip and you're playing this like game that's like very conditioned by the UI designers, that's literally designed to kind of make you addicted, to make you pulled into these social opinion status games. Like you have absolutely no illusion. You should never have any illusion that when you log on to twitter.com that you're doing something called like thinking or writing. You know, maybe if you're really skillful, maybe sometimes you are, and there's a certain way, you know, some extreme, you know, Twitter people have probably, you know, access to certain art form of doing that. I would grant that, I would give that. But even those people are kind of sacrificing themselves on the altar of this particular platform, and that's not a bet I would want to make personally as a writer for the longer term. And the other key thing, the other reason this is a really good and valuable like framework is all of the stuff that you're writing in your notebook can accumulate into longer form things, and this is crucial, right? So it's like you should absolutely learn the art of the tweet, the art of the short form aphorism, the art of the quip. These are actually tried and true genres, right? I mean, people have been writing aphorisms forever. There is a long-standing tradition of the aphorism, which you should be absolutely proud to participate in, and you should see it with that kind of elevated perspective. You know, that fits like a glove. That's what Twitter is essentially. So there's nothing wrong with learning the art of the aphorism, which is strongly rewarded today with these algorithmic platforms. Play that game, you know, have fun with that. But you're at all times knowing that those aphorisms you're writing are going to compile into larger essays. They're going to compile into newsletters. They're going to compile into books one day. And it's a matter of keeping that longer term mentality and that sacred kind of time each day where you're doing just original writing. Yes, you're chunking it off into quips and tweets and things like that, but you're watching it all accumulate and grow in this dedicated, cultivated personal space. And that's the key thing that most people don't do. People who try to be writers on Twitter, people generally don't do this. So that's why a lot of their work is not going to accumulate into anything larger. And that's how I think about it.
Absolutely. It occurs to me that one of your more recent, you've had a kind of writing module on your on Other Life, and which I have indeed participated in, discussing John Kennedy Toole. But one of your more recent episodes on Ezra Pound, you discussed how Pound kind of, I mean, it's not exactly that his thinking was shaped by Twitter or kind of, kind of a hyper psychologically conditioned manner to respond to an audience, but a desire or a need to kind of mastermind one's own intellectual career and master the social algorithm to get one's writing across. And I mean, to what extent do you think that is an issue for a scholar or a writer?
I think it's a huge issue, really. How many times do you go to a party and it's like, cool independent writers, dissidents, people who self-styled, counterculture revolutionaries. I hang with like a lot of people in different events, and I get to meet with a lot of people who are, really smart, interesting, independent people kind of in, these different kind of online anti-institutional kind of scenes that are emerging. But how many times when you go to this type of thing, how many times are people essentially talking about really relatively trite, like social media gossip? You know what I mean? It's beneath us. It's beneath us, but it's a really strong pull. It's a really, really strong kind of gravitational force to get kind of contained. It's like we've all escaped to the outside. We're free. And then we're immediately being kind of recuperated by like the most trite kind of everyday, like socio-psychological domesticating mechanisms. You know what I mean? I find this to be like really kind of sad and horrifying. And so to me, reading great works and studying great works and just basically keeping your mind as socially unconditioned as possible, just not paying attention to the Twitter controversies, the topics of the day, the discourse of the day, whoever's like, most fashionable or popular in the moment or whatever. You really I think you really want to try your best to just not pay attention to such things and to not even know what such things are. I think it's actually really important because, you know, in this this new world of independence, you know, it's a great gift, but it's also the risks and the temptations and the failure modes are also just voluminous and very, very strong. And so it's like, to me, this is one of the clearest ones. Like, what is the point? We have this historical opportunity in front of us, people like you and I and people listening to this podcast. We are literally at a historical juncture that is one of the most exciting opportunities in the history of Western civilization for true original independent thinkers, writers, creators. And there's a risk that you're going to piss away this opportunity. You're going to piss away your life at this remarkable, exciting turning point in the culture. There's a risk that you're going to piss away your life because you're paying too much of attention to some particular bullshit social media personality. And you're going to you could spend the next 20 years of your life kind of thinking and writing underneath the umbrella of one random midwit in the world in 2023. Like, that is a risk because there's no one else keeping you on the rails. There's no other structure, right? There's no institution that is going to force you to remember, you know, that Shakespeare is more important than Bronze Age pervert, right? It's like there's nothing keeping you on the rails. There's no one who is invested in keeping you prioritized correctly with a proper sense of proportion and a proper sense of the rank ordering of the works, the great works and the great authors and so on. And so this is, I think about this every day. It's like we have an amazing opportunity to do original, profound work at scale independently in the world today, more easily than any previous generation ever. And I see a lot of people who are going to piss it away because they're over-indexed to really short-term trends and fads. And to me, again, this is a life or death question. This is getting this right could produce a completely different life with completely different results than if you get this incorrect. And then that's why I take this so seriously and I talk about it with such vehemence.
Absolutely. It is a struggle to maintain that sort of focus on an original project, and the fact that you have an audience, it's just, you know, and it's a difficult and narrow road to walk, which I think you are kind of helping this, you know, new generation of, you know, intellectuals figure out how to navigate.
Well, I'm trying to figure it out for myself, and I'm just teaching what I learn as I go, you know? So, yeah, but again, you know, I don't describe myself. I wouldn't describe myself as an intellectual. I think these words are kind of unavoidable on certain, you know, topics. Like, yeah, you got to, you know, there's a certain tradition of culture that is specific, and we only have so many words to try to describe these things. But I'm aware of how much people hate this kind of stuff. It like triggers people so much, and it's actually really taught me that, you know, in a way, I also don't love these vocabularies because, like we were talking about before, you know, the scholar, the Greek term for scholar, scholastes, it just means someone who lives at ease. Isn't that interesting that the real ultimate kind of etymological meaning of scholarship is living at ease? And that's strange. That's not at all intuitive.
That is strange.
It's not at all intuitive to most people, but it makes perfect sense when you think about it. You know, skole, which is one of the roots for school, basically means like serious play. So leisure, basically leisure, play, and school actually historically are all supposed to be combined, essentially, because learning, true learning, is a kind of play. It's a serious play. That is what like real learning or real school is supposed to be, serious play. And so the life of a scholar requires leisure. Real schooling requires leisure, and it is in fact just a kind of cultivated leisure that, you know, that is essentially what all of this is at the end of the day. So it's not some sort of like rarefied, fancy thing like I'm so smart or I'm so special. No, it's really just there is a specific mode that human beings need to enter into to learn and to understand themselves and to make any progress whatsoever on who they are in the world and what they're trying to do in the world and what's real and what's not real, requires a certain mode of serious play, a certain mode of leisure and cultivated kind of focus and reflection on the highest values and the highest questions and the highest works that have come before us. And increasingly, I think that this is just going to be, this is going to become like basic mental hygiene, frankly. It's like, if you want to think clearly and achieve meaningful things in your world and live, like you're going to have to go through some kind of like mental hygiene camp, because the institutions obviously aren't providing it anymore. And so it's like, I actually see this as like much more generic and simple and a kind of everyday basic mental need for people, more so than some kind of rarefied thing.
Absolutely. I mean, it's not for nothing that I wrote my novel when I had a downturn in business, had more and thus more free time. And it's really hard, I find, to focus on creative and intellectual projects when you don't have that time to play, frankly, that time because to have an hour or two that you're like very intellectually productive, it's kind of hard to cram that into a day where you're also productive as a worker and productive as as I'm sure you, I don't yet have the privilege or honor of being a father, but you're a busy man these days. So it's hard to kind of, let me turn this around. How do you find kind of the inspiration to write and to create when you don't have enough time to play, as it were?
Yeah, well, it's a good question. For me personally, having the kid really has just forced me to take all this stuff more seriously, because when you're young and when you don't have kids yet, you can kind of always tell yourself like, I'll do it later, because you have so much time, right? And you can see, you feel as if you can do many things in your life when you're young and when you have a lot of time and you don't have a ton of, oppressive responsibilities on a day-to-day basis. You can always tell yourself, I'll do that later. There's plenty of time, because in a way there is. Once you have kids and your life gets busier and more filled with responsibilities, you have this really kind of scary, pretty difficult kind of reckoning where you're like, oh, I actually don't have that much time left in my life. There's just not going to be that much free time. There's not going to be that much leisure. And so suddenly the things you thought you would tell yourself like, oh, I'll do it later. I'll do it later. You suddenly realize, oh, my later is way smaller than I expected, or it's suddenly way smaller than I bargained for. And you're just you're really confronted with your finitude and your mortality, and just the sheer smallness of how much you're really going to be able to do moving forward. But of course, if you're in your 30s or even 40s, there's still plenty of time if you get serious about how you use your time. And it suddenly kind of starts to sink in. Okay, I can still do great things. I still have plenty of time ahead of me, but only if I'm very thoughtful about what I do at that time. You have to become brutally thoughtful about what you're going to do at that time. And to be, good at anything, let alone be great at anything, you pretty much have to focus on that one thing. And so that's for me kind of like what I've learned in the past year since I had a baby. And it's really been one of the major kind of ingredients and like this kind of refinement of the Other Life brand and my whole project and what exactly I'm doing, my kind of longer term plan for it all is really refined by this, because I'm like, okay, I only have so much time left. And if I want to be great at anything, I have to just do that one thing. And that's all you're really, that's all you can be allowed to do. I took desperate measures, dude. Like I sold my TV. We now have no TV in the house, things like that, because it's just like, I left academia to become something great on my own terms, to figure out a new way to do it. And if I have any chance of actually becoming a truly great writer that makes a dent in the culture in the long term, I need to basically do nothing else because there's no time to do anything else. And so if I'm not really serious about every day I'm reading only the greatest works, and every day I'm writing only at the highest, the highest level of my ability, with dedicated, deliberate practice in both of these things every day. If I do that, 2 or 3 hours every single day, like before the kid wakes up and things like that, if I do that, then I have an absolute shot at becoming truly great at this one thing and making a dent. But anything less than that, if I don't do that, if I'm not focused on only the greatest works and doing the highest work I'm capable of, if I'm not doing that every single day for at least a couple hours, my probability of being great is 0. It's pretty much that simple. And so it's like, if you do that, you have a shot at being great. And frankly, if you can do it consistently, you probably have a decent probability of cracking into, the upper echelons of at least like something meaningful. I'm not saying anyone, no one can guarantee you that you're going to be good or that you're going to be great or anything like that. That's up to God, frankly. It's like, that's not even for you to think too much about or worry too much about. But what I can say is that if you're reading and writing, if you're reading the great works and you're writing as authentically and honestly as you can every day for a couple hours, even just 2 hours, 1 hour reading, 1 hour writing, but you're doing that every single day, and even if you're as old as 40 or, whatever, if you're really doing that every day, I would bet money that in 20 years, you're going to actually produce a body of work that is, in some sense, just objectively, statistically, you are going to produce an exceptional body of work for the simple reason that almost no one can do that. Almost no one can put in that time that consistently. And so if you can simply do that, you're almost guaranteed to be in like the 90th percentile of lifetime writers. You're almost guaranteed objectively, right? I'm not saying it's going to be good. No one can promise that, or that, maybe it's not going to be great. Maybe it's not going to be that meaningful, but the bar is so low that getting into the 90th percentile is actually not that hard. The greats are like the 99.9%, that's the hard thing. And no one can guarantee you that. I would never so naively tell anyone that, that's something that you're guaranteed by just putting in the work or the time, but you are kind of guaranteed to get to the 90th percentile simply by brutal focus and consistency. And so, yeah, that's like what I think about now. And that's what's really been driven home to me since I had the baby. It's kind of like, I either want to be a great writer or I don't. And if you do, and I do, you pretty much have to be as insane as possible in reducing everything else and really like making that the priority.
Give a busy man a project, as they say. I note in like a lot of the GCs that I'm in, the people who like wake up and GM at like 4:30 or 5. I know that they're waking up to take care of their children, but regardless, I'm waking up at 7:38 and I'm thinking, okay, you did some additional work taking care of children, but you probably, spent more time just being awake and doing stuff than I did. So right. I can see how having, a family actually, gets you on that schedule that you need to be on to produce the work that you were meant to produce.
Yeah. It forces you to choose. It forces you to realize like, oh, okay, my time to do what I believe in doing is limited now. So you suddenly realize like, if I'm going to even have a chance at being great at anything, it's probably just going to be one thing. I probably have to pick that one thing and I have to just be brutally consistent about it. It's like your only chance really. And your sense of your sense of those limits and that finitude just gets really strong when you have a kid. It's sad. Honestly, it's hard. It is sad. It is like your future, the walls are closing in, and it's no joke in a way. People don't like when I talk like that because it sounds, down on family or whatever. I'm not down on family at all. I love my family. Yeah. It's a very welcome and powerful kind of pressure and forcing function, but the walls close in and they really do.
With that in mind, I don't want to keep you too long, but is there anything you want to discuss about the future of Other Life? Projects you want to talk about, plug? This is obviously a forum for you.
No, nothing about my own self that I want to plug, but I'm increasingly just obsessed with this message that I want to share with everyone, which is just read the great books, drop out of society, drop out of the discourse. Do not even know who the popular internet celebrity is right now. Read the great books, and that's it. And write about them on whatever you're learning from them, whatever you're thinking about them, whatever thoughts or observations they inspire, feelings they inspire. Drop out of society, read the great books, and just try to write something true every single day. And if you do that, you very quickly, like in 4 weeks or less, you will enter in your life will change. Your general perspective will refine to a palpable degree. Your confidence and your kind of just general calmness, your ability to focus and reflect on everything suddenly becomes much stronger. Your kind of ability to show up in conversations, to be an interesting person in social conversations, and showing going to parties, going to social functions, everything changes for the better. Everything improves, and it is literally the closest it's the closest thing I've ever discovered in my life that is a kind of like all-purpose general mind soul improver that just lifts everything up essentially. And I think especially if you feel called to be a writer or to pursue creative work, just drop out of society, immerse yourself in only the greatest works that are germane to your discipline or your domain, and just submerge yourself in the greats of the past and participate in their conversation. Every day, write something true related to that world, participate in the great conversation that's come before you, and ignore everything else, because the noise out there is tremendous. There's so much noise, and it is intoxicating. It is so enticing. It is so fun and exciting and satisfying in the short term to get in some Twitter dispute and to get retweeted by some micro famous celebrity. And this stuff is so fun, and it is so intoxicating that for most of the people in your life, most of them are going to get sucked up into that vortex, and they're never going to say anything profound or original. Don't be that person. Just drop out of that, submerge yourself in the greats, and try to write something true every day. And I think that this is like one of the single most reliable heuristics or frameworks for living a truly virtuous and thoughtful and sophisticated life that will enable you to do the more profound and original things that you want to do. This is my talking point now. This is like my core belief that I'm kind of obsessed with. So I just wanted to leave you with a reiteration of that.
Absolutely. Listen to Justin, reading great books, and taking the time to actually think about this stuff. That is something that is going to serve you very well. Certainly served me well in engaging with Other Life, engaging with Justin's project, and frankly, New Right, as we discussed, would not be here today if I didn't connect with Matt through Indie Thinkers. So to bring it home, again, thank you for the work you're doing, Justin.
Thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it. Yeah, people can follow the newsletter at just otherlife.co, otherlife.co. That's kind of the main centerpiece of everything I'm doing if people want to stay in touch. And you can reply to those emails if you want to hit me up about anything. I'm always happy to talk with people. I reply to every email. And I really appreciate what you're doing, Dan. I appreciate you and Matt, and just keep up the good work.
Thank you. Great to have you on.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.